Ambassador Amar Sinha, good to see you after a while. Now that it's COVID, we're all doing video conferencing of some sorts or the other, but horrendous attacks, crime against humanity, they've been called. I mean, most of them are in Afghanistan yesterday. Maternity ward, mothers, small, just born children, civilians in a funeral procession as well. Though, of course, the Taliban very quickly said that they were not responsible.
Well, yeah, good morning. Good to see you again. Well, I think Taliban is responding on expected lines. You see, while some statistics said that this year attacks have been vicious, but Taliban has only claimed those attacks which have happened on security forces, etc. The civilian targets and others, including the Gurudwara, have been left for other groups to claim. And I think it's a similar thing that is happening after this attack on the hospital and the funeral, because obviously there's no justification. But the question really is, why are these attacks happening? And actually, these groups are preparing for talks. I mean, they're serious about talks. I think this is basically to soften the Afghan government, which has sort of dug its heel in terms of the release of all the prisoners as demanded. So the messaging that is being sent is that unless you give in to all the demands of Taliban, attacks will happen and you will not be able to protect yourself. Now, I'm not saying that this could necessarily be done by Taliban. It could also be done by supporters of Taliban who want Taliban to come back as victorious. And that is why this differentiation is being made, that when Hazaras are attacked, then Islamic State will come up and claim, when that Gurudwara is attacked. So I feel that these minorities and special category people are much more exposed today beyond the defense forces, because Taliban is restricting itself to attacking NDS, army, military bases, posts, etc. But on that hospital, very interesting things. I don't know if you've seen the pictures that have come out, the weapons that have been captured, or the bag that was in the hospital.
The one with the Pakistani flag now. I mean that.
Yeah, not only that, it's the professional level of the equipment.
Oh yes.
Telescopic sights, etc.
Oh yeah.
I don't think suicide bombers and fedayins come with sort of professionally equipped weaponry.
Now, when you look at how the US has responded to that, it essentially seems that they are accepting the Taliban's narrative that they were not responsible. Is that in keeping in line with their policy at the moment, which is to get out of Afghanistan through a deal or no deal?
Yes, I think it's absolutely clear. Not only accepting the Taliban, that is very clear by the fact that they went ahead and signed an agreement with them. Though 17 times the document says that they don't recognize Islamic State as a state. But then it also granted them certain functions of state, like dealing with migrants and people who are seeking asylum in Afghanistan, or not issuing passports and visas, which is something which is way beyond in the future. So if it's a non-state, why are you talking about these things? And also on the violence part, I think there is a inbuilt tolerance in that agreement that as long as you don't attack US forces and NATO allies, and when I say allies, don't mistake that every country is an ally. It's only treaty allies of USA that it is restricted to. The rest is all fair game. That the violence will continue till an intra-Afghan process starts, and the agreement itself says that this would lead to a comprehensive ceasefire and stop into violence.
Now, when you look at, say, the Taliban, like you're pointing out, they have this deniability factor, which we've seen with their sponsors as well, in India or in other cases, whether it's Pakistan. Whether the Taliban are accepting it or not, whether you accept their denial, like you're pointing out, whether there are other groups, whether the groups within the Taliban, whether it's the Haqqanis or whoever is responsible for that, or even if you give it to the Islamic State in Khorasan Province of Daesh, which hasn't officially at least claimed the attacks yesterday on the maternity hospital. One question comes up is, if you accept the Taliban narrative that the US is doing, then why are you negotiating with them if they cannot stop violence? Second is, if it is some kind of a proxy for the Taliban itself for reasons that they need to come back into power stronger, then where does that leave us?
Well, more than leaving us, actually, where does it leave the Afghan civilian population
I mean, us, I
and
didn't
the
mean
government?
India. Yeah,
Yes, us
yeah,
meaning the civilians and the region. It leaves us in a very bad state where we'll have to live with a very uh, virulent sort of violence or strain of violence, represented neither through Taliban or other groups, and which is going to stay there no matter what they say. So I don't know if assurances given by Taliban has any meaning in terms of peace for Afghanistan or even peace for the region.
now, when you look at the U.S. Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad, now, unlike everybody else who's doing a lot of video conference calls, whether it's multilaterally or bilaterally, he chose to go to Doha, meet Mullah Baradar and the Taliban, come to India, meet the Foreign Minister Jaishankar and the NSA Doval, then go to Pakistan, and the only public meeting that we know of is with the Chief of Army Staff, General Qamar Bajwa. From the interview that was given to the Hindu by Zalmay Khalilzad, what is it that you read?
One thing which is very clear to me, and which he said himself, well, two things. First thing, he himself publicly said that this is not a peace agreement, what they have signed with Taliban. And that is what we have all been saying. Many strategic analysts, etc., here have been talking about a peace agreement, but it is not. And he states that. The second thing, which from my perspective was very worrying, was when he says that if India has concerns about violence from Afghanistan, they should directly engage with Taliban. Now, what does that mean? It means that the agreement that the US has signed with Taliban only covers US. Each one
And the
is
allies, the treaty allies, like you're pointing out.
treaty allies. That's why I said it's treaty allies. And that even for violence concerns, we need to engage with Taliban. I thought that that was going back to the old situation where only violence and terrorism against US was categorized as terrorism, and the rest were on their own. And that is, I guess, a lesson for us and both a wake-up call that really we need to start looking at the entire emerging scenario. Now, in that, does Taliban coming back help India's position or India's friends in Afghanistan or even the Afghans who want to have a sovereign country? These are some serious questions that are being asked. So that is why I am now today very hopeful that this agreement would lead to any sort of peace in Afghanistan. Um, and the message, I think, is clear. The writing on the wall, the faster we read it, better it is. And this is also a time where some of our own strategic thinkers and people who are appearing as apologists of Taliban start to step back and think that what is it that Taliban is offering in return to us or even to Afghanistan? Are they an independent force? Are they a force for peace and stability? Or they want to grab power and go back to an emirate status? And is that the type of neighborhood we want? So these are all important questions that policymakers will have to sort of weigh in. And I think overlook some of the din which is being created by the great PR machinery that Taliban has now sort of put up together.
Ambassador, like you're saying, a wake-up call, but the counter that you're talking about, the voices that are coming, is that it's a wake-up call that sooner rather than later, if you have to deal with the Taliban, that is India, then you might as well do it sooner rather than later.
Well, for them, I have a counter question. That the agreement that the US has signed is really about concerns of US security concerns vis-a-vis Al-Qaeda and international terror groups.
Yeah.
So will they apply this same advice that they're giving to us that we go and talk to Taliban? Why don't they also directly engage with Al-Qaeda? If that is where the threat is coming from, Al-Qaeda today is, well, it's just about a splinter group in Afghanistan. So I don't think that's a very valid reason. And what do you talk to Taliban? Do we go and plead that please change your basic characteristics, That be more humane with your own fellow citizens. Yes, we can do that. We can do that publicly. We can. I'm sure there are ways of sending messages to Taliban without necessarily engaging them and giving them legitimacy. We are all aware of the ethnic and family connections. There are people where that there are families which are divided. There's one family in the NSF, other in the Taliban. So I think conveying a message is not that difficult. For that, you don't have to do a diplomatic ball in Doha necessarily.
When you're talking about legitimacy, the whole process that the US has been conducting with the Taliban, leaving out the Afghan government, so as to speak, and even Afghans, there were few opportunities in India, and you also represented India along with Ambassador Raghavan in Moscow as non-official observers. But that legitimacy factor is, when you look at the Taliban psychology, it has been given huge legitimacy compared to what happened in 1996 to 2001. Just three countries there, one sponsor, two others, Saudi Arabia and UAE. Now the whole world recognizes them. They go to Moscow, they go to Jakarta, they go to Uzbekistan, Indonesia. The factor that India has not engaged with them is that, does that matter to us, or is it that we are the only ones who have our cards left and that can be used as an advantage?
Amitabh, I have a view, perhaps it's not the mainstream view today. I guess it is very fashionable to go and start talking to Taliban as if that's the only big show in town. That is not really correct situation on the ground in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has changed. And yes, it is absolutely ironical that when the Islamic Emirates controlled the territory, controlled the city, only three countries in the world actually gave them recognition. Today, when they are still in sort of exile within courts, but pretending to be a government in exile, there are more countries willing to go and engage. But that engagement, I don't know, they have got some diplomatic legitimacy, but does that translate into legitimacy in terms of actually coming back to Kabul and governing its people like a normal government in a power sharing arrangement? These are questions that we will have to take a call on ourselves. See, we have to remember this is our region, South Asia. We don't necessarily have to follow a policy set by outsiders whose stakes are different. And you have an option of walking away and leaving the region. You don't have an option. You have to live here. Afghanistan will remain your neighbor like it has for thousands of years. And what happens there is going to directly affect us. It's going to directly affect Pakistan. So I think we need to also send out a message that it's also in Pakistan's interest to ensure that when Taliban reintegrates, this region actually reaches some level of stability. Or they can decide to continue with their policy of destabilize Afghanistan, allowing Taliban to come back to Kabul, then create other groups to put pressure on them, and other groups will be even more radical, even more violent, as we are seeing today.
Now, when you're talking about instability, just the stability, just talk about the opposite, instability, political instability in Afghanistan, though we're hearing that President Ghani and his former chief executive, Abdullah, are close to reaching some kind of agreement, maybe not an executive post for Dr. Abdullah, but probably heading the peace and reconciliation team with cabinet nominees, etc. That could come soon. Now, in view of what Zalmay Khalilzad has told the media in India, do you see New Delhi's any role in internal dynamics, internal politics of getting them together, since we have equity with the government and, say, Dr. Abdullah and the other political...
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think government of India will realize that it has a role because somebody else reminds them. It would be a wrong read. I think we are very cognizant of the fact that we have equity in Afghanistan. We have friends throughout the political spectrum, and we should be actively engaged in counseling them that they need to move towards bringing political stability. While, of course, a lot of papers I have seen or articles I have read about this instability in Kabul, it is true that the elections were disputed. But ultimately, these are elections that where Afghans in small numbers did participate, and they will eventually decide. Now, I think this route of coming to a compromise is far better than a violent group coming and grabbing power through use of force. So we will have to do that, which is the lesser evil. And one more thing I may tell your viewers that while a lot of things are written about the ability of Afghans to squabble and fight, not very little is known about the tremendous capacity of Afghans to compromise. And that is what you will see. If you see the cabinet which has been formed, or some of the members who have been inducted, are clearly from Abdullah's camp. Only 2 days ago, his spokesman and then other leaks came out that they're very close to a breakthrough. Of course, it may not be called a national unity government like in 2014. He may not be called the chief executive officer. But the fact is that we are looking at a situation where you can clearly see that there's a thaw and there will be some sort of political compromise. And that is what is required. You need this political compromise for only one thing, so that you can present a unified front in the negotiations with Taliban. And I think that sense of national purpose, no matter which side of the political divide they are, all Afghans share.
When you're talking about, do you still follow the belief that it's only once intra-Afghan talks start, that is with the Taliban and the group, there has been a group that has been named, but we're not sure whether that will be the representative group. It's only after that that India should engage with the Taliban?
With the other Afghan factions and leaders, we should be engaging now. And I'm sure we are already engaging. Foreign Secretary was there. He had delivered a letter from Prime Minister, which was, of course, was seen as an endorsement of President Ghani. But people forget that he met the entire spectrum of political leadership. On the Taliban, yes, if it is only to give a certain legitimacy and public recognition of Taliban, I don't think we should be in a great rush. No, we have to be very, very clear that what is it that Taliban is going to deliver, how it has changed, what will be its policies and outlook for the region. And only then, so that is why I say that let us not be pushed into joining the bandwagon, so to say, in actually delegitimizing our friends are in Kabul.
Now, do you see anything that has changed in terms of how Pakistan is dealing with the whole situation?
Well, Pakistan is cooperating from American perspective, you know? And I guess this is a track record that they always cooperate, that there's no other option. They have even as long as they have retained the cards, they don't cooperate. Same Mullah Baradar, when he wanted to engage with Afghanistan on his own, was put behind bars. 2018, he's released because the Americans now want him in war. So they cooperate. But we have to remember that all these terror groups are expendable commodities. You know, each one has a shelf life. They serve a certain purpose. And once that purpose is served, why only Mullah Baradar? In fact, they would disown the entire Taliban. But before that they would be an alternate pressure group created and active. And that is what I feel is what we see when this ISIS starts coming onto the picture so boldly and so proudly, suddenly out of the blue, in the last 3 years. That I think shift is happening.
We've seen reports from Afghanistan suggesting that the air corridors, in spite of the situation in both countries with the COVID reopening, pine nuts and hing coming in from Afghanistan, the wheat that we've been offering, the second tranche, is already on its way to Afghanistan from Chabahar itself. But COVID and how what we get reports from Afghanistan of the situation there, considering the health infrastructure, considering how much it's dependent on foreign aid. How do you see, I think there were some of your words in a tweet possibly that, you know, the Taliban was killing more people than the pandemic in Afghanistan, or at least terrorist groups were. COVID, now that's a real game changer for the whole world, but especially for Afghanistan.
Yeah, COVID, of course, it has hit everybody. You know, nobody doesn't know where this enemy has come from and how to fight it, because you don't have a medicine or a vaccine. So it is definitely difficult, and particularly difficult in Afghanistan. The health services, in the best of times, are limited. So I think we are trying to do whatever is best in terms of the assistance, the PPE, the medicines, etc. And that is in that context I had suggested that that will be a great gesture because ultimately we are talking of better health for Afghan people. That we should, if asked or requested, we should allow our medicines even to go to Taliban controlled areas and treat the Afghans. And that is, I think, that will be the real focus on Afghan people. And those are small gestures we can do. We had helped Taliban even in the past when they needed assistance in uh, for medical emergencies. So these are things we should do for the Afghan people.
Ambassador Sinha, again, appreciate your insights. And of course, we'll keep coming back to you for more because this is a story which has been going on for over 4 decades and it will go on for a long while. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good talking to you.
And for all our viewers there, if you are interested in these kind of videos, you can just subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just click on that button on the right of your screen, or you can even click on the bell icon on YouTube.